What happens to a civilization when its most sacred protectors are bound by vows so disturbing that even their own scriptures hesitate to name them? This is where the story of the guardians of the eternal fire begins, in a world where faith was carved not only in stone, but in flesh, secrecy, and absolute obedience. Imagine standing before a flame believed to hold the breath of creation itself, a fire that never died, and realizing that those chosen to protect it were shaped by rituals designed, to strip away everything human. This was not devotion as we understand it today. It was transformation through fear, discipline, and a sense of divine inevitability that shaped every sacred vow they took. For generations, the guardians were portrayed as noble figures, embodiments of purity and sacrifice. Yet beneath that polished image lived a system of hidden practices, shadowed initiations, and sacred rules whispered only in underground chambers. These early vows were not gentle promises of loyalty. They were demands that reshaped the mind and punished hesitation. To even witness the initiation was to understand that their divine purpose came at a price far heavier than any believer could imagine. And as the ancient chronicles suggest, the first vows carved the foundation of a spiritual order, both revered and feared, built upon a fire that exposed more than it illuminated. When you picture these guardians standing motionless beside the sacred flame, what do you see? Discipline? Strength? Devotion? Or something deeper, something unsettling? The reflection of rituals designed to erase doubt by erasing the self. These earliest commitments reveal not only the origins of the order, but the true nature of its purpose, wrapped in layers of divine symbolism and hidden cruelty. And the more we uncover the origins of these forbidden vows, the clearer it becomes that the flame they guarded was not the only thing consuming them. You ever felt that strange pull, that need to understand what lies behind forbidden stories, behind rituals people preferred to ignore? Stay with me, because this is where their true nature begins to show itself. What you discover now might genuinely surprise you, and your perspective on ancient devotion may never be the same. If this sparks something in you, tell me in the comments what part of these ancient vows intrigues you the most. Leave your like so this investigation reaches more people, and check if you are already subscribed to the channel so you do not miss what comes next as we move deeper into the shadows of this sacred order, letting the next layer emerge with the same fire that shaped them. As the order evolved, the first vow that reshaped a guardian's existence was the renunciation of personal identity, a ritual so profound that ancient witnesses claimed it felt like watching a soul detach itself from memory. Once a candidate crossed the threshold of the initiation hall, their former names ceased to exist. They were stripped not only of titles or lineage, but of every symbol that connected them to the world outside the eternal fire. To the guardians, individuality was seen as a fracture, a dangerous weakness that could tempt a protector to prioritize their own desires over the sacred flame. And so, the vow demanded absolute severance, not as a symbolic gesture, but as a psychological rupture meant to sever past and possibility. The ceremony began with the extinguishing of a personal ember, a small flame that represented the life the initiate once lived. Elders watched in silence as it burned out, interpreting the final wisp of smoke as the release of the initiate's former self. It was believed that only a vessel emptied of its history could be filled with the divine purpose of guarding the eternal fire. From that moment, the initiate was addressed only by a ritual designation, a title chosen according to their perceived weaknesses and strengths, ensuring that even the manner in which they were spoken to reinforced the transformation. The guardians knew exactly what they were doing. Erasing the past made the initiate malleable, easier to mold, easier to command. But the renunciation went far deeper than abandoning a name. The guardians enforced a complete removal of personal memories through rituals designed to overwhelm the senses, pushing the initiate into a continuous cycle of physical deprivation and repetitive sacred recitations. Over time, initiates reported forgetting the sound of their mother's voice, the contours of their home, the stories of their childhood. The order believed that by erasing emotional bonds, the eternal fire would become the sole anchor in the initiate's life. The flame was not just sacred, it was the replacement for family, identity, and purpose. This transformation produced individuals who were simultaneously hollow and unwavering, humans reshaped into guardians who acted without hesitation, without longing, without a self to preserve. The vow, created a paradox in which the initiate lost their humanity precisely to serve what was considered a divine mission. And yet, records suggest that beneath this uniform facade, fragments of identity still flickered, small embers of their former lives that the rituals could not completely extinguish. These hidden fragments, though faint, would later become cracks in the order's foundation, quiet reminders that no matter how fiercely one tries to erase the self, something always remains, waiting for the moment when the fire burns just bright enough to reveal it once more. And this silent tension continued to shape the Guardians from within as their sacred duties grew heavier and more consuming over time. Once the renunciation of identity was sealed, the Guardians were introduced to the second layer of indoctrination, the oath of absolute bodily submission. Unlike ordinary vows of obedience, this commitment demanded that the body itself become a vessel for the sacred flame, a tool, stripped of desire, pain, or hesitation. Initiates were subjected to elaborate ceremonies in chambers heated by the eternal fire, where physical endurance was tested under extreme conditions. Every posture, every breath, every movement was observed, recorded, and judged, leaving no room for instinct or rebellion. The Guardians' elders believed that mastery over the flesh was mastery over the spirit, and only those who could endure without faltering could truly serve. The rituals were meticulously designed to blur the line between pain and devotion. Cold, heat, fasting, and continuous vigil combined to push each initiate to the brink of collapse. In some texts, scribes noted the precision with which the elders administered these trials, a shift in flame intensity, a timed sequence of physical exertion, a silent expectation that each candidate would remain immobile, yet alert, a living paradox of endurance and surrender. It was not punishment for its own sake, but a crucible, intended to dissolve any lingering attachment to personal will. The body was forced into ritualized obedience until instinct no longer dictated action, and only the flame guided thought and movement. Within these chambers, the line between devotion and degradation blurred. The candidate's reflection in polished bronze mirrors, or occasionally in the fire itself, became a reminder that the self no longer belonged to them. Every sensation, every shiver, every bead of sweat was interpreted as a message from the flame, a test of worthiness. The oath demanded that even discomfort be embraced as sacred, an offering to the eternal fire. Failure was not simply a matter of punishment, it was seen as a spiritual impurity, a mark that could taint the entire order if left unchecked. In this way, the Guardians shaped a hierarchy not of rank or birth, but of endurance and absolute submission to their sacred mission. Yet even in this rigorous process, traces of humanity persisted. Some initiates described moments when pain became transcendent, where the body seemed to merge with the flame, not as a tool or a test, but as a living conduit of sacred energy. The elders recorded these rare instances as signs of potential greatness, yet warned that such transcendence was fleeting, a delicate balance between devotion and destruction. The vow of bodily submission, while ostensibly about obedience, was equally about transformation, creating beings who could endure, witness, and execute rituals without hesitation, while maintaining a connection to a purpose that was larger than themselves. It was in these shadowed chambers, under the relentless heat and scrutiny of the eternal fire, that the Guardians truly became both protectors and prisoners, bodies trained to act as extensions of the flame, yet minds still tethered to fragments of what they had once been, setting the stage for trials that would challenge not just flesh, but the deepest recesses of their spirit. As the oath of bodily submission became ingrained, the Guardians were forced to confront a new and relentless trial, the vow of unbroken vigilance, a commitment that blurred the boundary between ritual and torment. Night after night, they stood beside the eternal fire, eyes wide and unyielding, while the world outside succumbed to darkness and silence. The chambers were designed to distort perception. Shadows danced across walls, flames cast illusions that tested concentration, and the cold whispers of the wind through stone corridors carried faint echoes of imagined threats. The Guardians learned that any lapse could be interpreted as failure, and failure could unravel the delicate fabric of their sacred order. There was no rest, no mercy, only the continuous demand for absolute attentiveness. During these vigils, initiates endured mental assaults designed to unseat every thought not directly tethered to the flame. Sounds were amplified and distorted, from the crackling of the fire to the faintest footstep in distant halls. They were trained to catalog each stimulus, to discern patterns, to remain unshaken by fear or confusion. It was said that a guardian's mind could anticipate movements, predict danger, and detect deception even before it manifested, all while maintaining the outward calm of devotion. The process transformed ordinary perception into something supernatural, but the cost was invisible: fragments of memory, pieces of self, and the ability to trust one's own senses were gradually consumed by the rigor of the vow. The texts and fragmented scrolls left by the order suggest that these periods of unbroken vigilance were the crucible in which the Guardian's most secret and darkest capabilities were forged. Those who faltered faced not immediate death, but the creeping erosion of their status within the hierarchy, whispers that could isolate them socially and spiritually, slowly stripping them of confidence and hope. The elders observed closely, noting subtle signs of weakness: a flicker in the eyes, a slight tremor, a mind wandering toward forbidden memories. Every detail was recorded, not only to maintain order, but to reinforce the omnipresent reality that the eternal fire required total devotion, untainted by hesitation or doubt. What emerges from these ancient rites is an understanding that the price of watching and guarding was far beyond the physical. The guardians' very minds became vessels for an unrelenting discipline, capable of perceiving threats invisible to ordinary humans, yet susceptible to the quiet erosion of self-awareness. And it is here, at the intersection of tireless vigilance and psychological endurance, that the true horror and ingenuity of the Order's secret practices are revealed. If you have ever wondered what it truly means to sacrifice oneself for a higher purpose, consider the cost borne silently each night by those who swore to protect the eternal fire. Now, I want you to pause and reflect. Which part of this unwavering watch would break an ordinary person? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know how you imagine enduring a vigil that never ends, because your perspective not only matters, it continues the story that the Guardians themselves could never tell. With the Guardians' minds honed by unbroken vigilance, the next vow tested the very essence of their spirit: the oath of enforced purification, a trial that combined both physical and psychological endurance into a singularly harrowing ritual. This vow required initiates to undergo processes meant to strip away every trace of personal impurity, a concept defined not only by bodily cleanliness, but by thoughts, memories, and desires. The purification rituals were meticulous, often lasting for hours under the oppressive heat of the flame, while the Guardians chanted sacred verses, their voices steady yet strained, echoing through chambers designed to disorient and challenge their perception of reality. Every heartbeat, every drop of sweat, every shiver was both a measure of devotion and a test of resilience. The Order's writings describe complex sequences involving ceremonial ablutions, exposure to flames in controlled proximity, and the application of aromatic herbs that could intoxicate or induce hallucinations, all designed to challenge the candidate's composure and focus. Elders observed silently, their gaze weighing each reaction, noting the subtlest tremor of hesitation or flicker of doubt. The intention was clear: to create guardians whose spirit was as refined and unyielding as the eternal fire they served. Each successful purification reinforced the bond between the guardian and the flame, yet it also left a subtle fracture, a recognition of the immense toll exacted by such practices. During these purification rites, initiates were often left in isolation for extended periods, confronted only with their thoughts and the omnipresent fire. Some texts hint at psychological manipulations, illusions of their own failures projected in mirrors or reflected in pools of water, voices whispering doubts in the shadows, the echo of footsteps that were not there. The goal was to teach resilience, to train the mind to resist fear, confusion, and temptation. Each guardian emerged from this phase altered, their psyche refined yet scarred, capable of performing duties that required unwavering focus, discipline, and the ability to act without hesitation under extreme conditions. It was not merely about strength or obedience. The oath demanded transformation. The candidate's spirit was stripped to its core, leaving only what was necessary to serve the flame. Memories of personal life, attachments, and emotional ties were repressed or reshaped to serve the greater purpose of the Order. These rites of purification created individuals capable of extraordinary focus, almost superhuman in their ability to withstand fear, pain, and temptation. Yet there was a cost: the subtle erosion of empathy, the suppression of individual morality, and a growing dependence on the structure and rituals of the Order to define right and wrong. Through these trials, the guardians became embodiments of the eternal fire's will, their humanity tempered and contained, setting the stage for the ultimate tests that would reveal the true depths of their devotion and the full extent of the Order's dark influence on those who pledged themselves completely. Having endured purification, the Guardians were confronted with a vow that blurred the line between loyalty and obsession, the oath of absolute devotion to the living flame itself. This was no ordinary pledge. It demanded a psychological surrender that entwined their identity, desires, and very sense of purpose with the fire they protected. In secluded chambers, candidates were instructed to meditate before the eternal fire for hours on end, their minds stripped of distraction, their attention fused entirely with the dancing tongues of flame. Elders would observe the interplay of emotion, thought, and physical response, determining whether the initiate's connection was genuine or superficial. Only through complete immersion could a guardian claim readiness to serve. The process of devotion was rigorous, designed to erode the remnants of personal will while amplifying reverence and obedience. Initiates were instructed to feel the heat as more than temperature, to perceive it as a living presence, a consciousness that observed, judged, and demanded total allegiance. Many described the sensation as both excruciating and exhilarating, a paradoxical blend that left the body trembling while the mind entered a state of intense clarity. Those unable to maintain this focus were subjected to additional cycles, facing prolonged meditation periods, controlled exposure to the flame, and repetitive ritual recitations designed to reinforce the psychological bond. Physical trials accompanied the mental rigor. Initiates were required to move in precise patterns around the fire, performing actions that synchronized body and mind. A single misstep, a hesitation in posture, or a faltering chant could indicate weakness, prompting correction through subtle but deliberate forms of discipline. The elders understood that obedience alone was insufficient. The guardian's devotion had to manifest in both thought and action, creating a unity between the individual and the sacred flame that was almost impossible to sever. Over time, the body itself became an instrument of service, conditioned to respond instinctively to the needs of the ritual and the will of the fire. The psychological transformation extended beyond the chambers. Guardians began to perceive all decisions, relationships, and events in their lives through the lens of the flame's needs. Dreams were filtered, thoughts realigned, desires reframed to serve the sacred mission. It was a form of cognitive conditioning that rendered them singularly focused and extraordinarily resilient, yet increasingly detached from ordinary human emotion. The flame became both guide and master, a force that demanded loyalty while reshaping the guardian into an entity whose identity was inseparable from the ritual they maintained. This bond, forged in heat, isolation, and repetition, would define the guardians for life, preparing them for trials that tested not only endurance and skill, but the very essence of their morality, as they faced challenges that would reveal the darkest truths of the eternal fire and the unyielding devotion it commanded. As the Guardians' devotion deepened, they were introduced to one of the most insidious and revealing tests of their allegiance, the vow of perpetual silence. This oath required that all spoken words, save for the sacred recitations tied directly to the eternal fire, be abandoned completely. Communication with peers, reflection aloud, or any expression of personal thought became forbidden. The silence was not merely physical, it was psychological, designed to strip away emotional expression and enforce a constant internal dialogue that revolved solely around duty, observation, and the will of the fire. Any lapse, even a whispered muttering, was met with scrutiny and correction, reinforcing the lesson that the flame must remain the sole voice in their lives. During the early months, the silence was agonizing. Initiates reported that their thoughts began to echo louder in the absence of speech, amplifying every fear, doubt, and memory they had struggled to suppress. The elders instructed them to redirect these internal echoes into devotion, to let every heartbeat, every shiver, every flicker of anxiety become a prayer or a reflection on their sacred duty. Some describe these months as disorienting, where reality seemed to fracture between the visible world and the internal landscape shaped entirely by their connection to the flame. The silence became both a shield and a cage, isolating the mind while focusing attention with unprecedented intensity. Beyond the personal torment, the vow of silence served a strategic purpose within the order. By limiting communication, the elders ensured that knowledge of rituals, sacred instructions, and inner hierarchies could not escape the confines of the chambers. Each guardian became a living repository of the order's secrets, carrying its power and its burdens without the possibility of divulging even a fragment of what they had witnessed. The weight of this responsibility compounded the psychological pressure, fostering an environment where every action was intentional, every movement deliberate, and every gesture a reflection of devotion rather than self-interest. The vow also revealed the true nature of the order's discipline. It was not just about obedience, but about control over perception, thought, and identity. Those who succeeded learned to hear the fire in their silence, to interpret its whispers and movements as guidance, a dialogue accessible only to the most attuned minds. Those who faltered often suffered invisible consequences, inner turmoil, loss of focus, subtle but irreversible shifts in status within the hierarchy. This was where devotion merged with discipline in its most extreme form. Silence was no longer merely a rule, it was an instrument of transformation, shaping the mind, tempering the spirit, and revealing the deepest capacities for endurance and obedience. Now, I want you to consider the weight of this silence. Could you survive days, months, or years without speaking, relying solely on thought and observation, knowing that any misstep might compromise not just your own status, but the integrity of the entire order? Share in the comments how you imagine enduring such isolation, and reflect on the psychological power it wields. Let us know your thoughts, because understanding the mind of a guardian under this vow is crucial to grasping the profound and disturbing nature of the eternal fire's secret rituals. Following the trial of silence, the guardians faced one of the most challenging and psychologically intricate stages of their sacred training, the breaking and rebuilding of their moral compass through the testing of vows. These tests were subtle, often administered without the candidate realizing the gravity of each choice, designed to create internal conflict and force the guardian to reconcile personal instincts with the demands of the eternal fire. Decisions were framed as moral dilemmas, seemingly trivial tasks masking profound ethical significance. Each action taken, each hesitation, was recorded, analyzed, and used to determine the guardian's alignment with the sacred principles that govern the order. The process demanded not only obedience, but the suppression of personal moral judgment in favor of ritualized adherence, conditioning the mind to prioritize the fire's will above all else. The order's records describe exercises that ranged from the mundane to the horrifying. Initiates might be asked to observe acts of cruelty or injustice and respond according to coded instructions that tested their commitment to impartiality, discipline, and obedience. These exercises were designed to erode empathy selectively, allowing only those feelings directly tied to the sacred mission to remain intact. The trials forced the guardians to distinguish between instinctual responses to human suffering and the demands of their sacred duties, creating a profound cognitive dissonance that reshaped perception and emotional processing. By the end of these exercises, the guardian's mind was trained to act decisively, often in situations that would confound ordinary reasoning, with the eternal fire as the only constant guiding principle. Psychological manipulation was further enhanced through ritualized observation. Initiates were often placed in scenarios where subtle cues indicated a preferred course of action, yet the moral stakes were opaque. Elders watched and noted reactions, reinforcing behaviors that aligned with the order's long-term objectives and correcting deviations through intensified rituals or extended isolation. Over time, the guardians internalized the order's philosophy so deeply that even in the absence of supervision, their thoughts and decisions were guided by the implicit understanding that the eternal fire's purpose outweighed individual judgment. This internalization was essential, ensuring that the guardians could operate independently while maintaining the integrity and secrecy of the sacred flame. The culmination of these moral tests was not only obedience, but the creation of a cognitive framework in which the guardian's sense of right and wrong became inseparable from the ritualized logic of the order. This allowed for acts that might seem incomprehensible or even repugnant to outsiders, yet were executed with absolute certainty, conviction, and efficiency by those who had undergone years of indoctrination. The guardians emerged as individuals capable of navigating extreme circumstances, making decisions under intense psychological pressure, and performing duties that transcended ordinary human ethics. In this way, the testing of vows served as both a crucible and a mirror, revealing the profound transformation of the mind and preparing the order for the final stages of initiation, where loyalty, endurance, and identity would be pushed to their ultimate limits. As the Guardians neared the final stages of their transformation, the process of recruitment and indoctrination for new initiates took on a sinister precision that ensured the Order's continuity and the unwavering loyalty of its members. Prospective candidates were selected from a pool of devoted followers, chosen for their resilience, intelligence, and susceptibility to ritual discipline. The recruitment itself was shrouded in secrecy, often conducted in shadowed chambers far from public scrutiny, where the gravity of the eternal fire was emphasized from the very first encounter. The elders understood that the foundation of the Order's power lay not only in the existing guardians, but in the meticulous preparation of those who would inherit the sacred duties and perpetuate the hidden traditions. Once identified, recruits underwent a series of preparatory trials that mirrored the challenges faced by fully initiated guardians. These included exposure to intense heat, fasting, meditation in isolation, and repetitive chanting designed to test focus, obedience, and emotional resilience. The candidates' responses were observed with exacting scrutiny. Subtle hesitations, changes in posture, or the faintest signs of doubt could alter their trajectory within the hierarchy. The process was deliberately incremental, breaking down familiar behaviors and reinforcing the values of self-denial, reverence for the flame, and absolute alignment with the Order's secretive objectives. By the time candidates reached the threshold of full initiation, their perceptions, desires, and priorities had been reshaped to reflect the priorities of the eternal fire, leaving little room for personal ambition outside the sacred mission. The indoctrination process extended beyond physical and mental trials into the psychological and social spheres. Recruits were taught to value secrecy above all else, understanding that the rituals, doctrines, and history of the Order were not to be shared with outsiders. Knowledge became power, and obedience became survival. Elders encouraged subtle rivalries, peer scrutiny, and hierarchical compliance to instill a sense of constant vigilance, ensuring that new guardians internalized the Order's rules without question. In this way, each generation of recruits not only reinforced the Order's authority, but also expanded the psychological architecture that maintained its influence over minds and actions alike. Through repetition, observation, and selective reinforcement, the principles of the eternal fire became the lens through which all recruits would view the world, filtering perception, shaping morality, and solidifying devotion. By the end of this meticulous process, the new guardians were indistinguishable in purpose and mindset from those who had come before them. The Order had ensured continuity, not just of duty, but of identity, as the recruits internalized the sacred flame's demands as the defining framework of their existence. Every action, every decision, every thought would now serve the flame, echoing the centuries-old patterns of devotion, endurance, and secrecy that had shaped the Order from its inception. The recruitment and indoctrination of new guardians thus secured both the perpetuation of the sacred fire and the transformation of ordinary individuals into the Order's living instruments, prepared to endure and execute the most extreme demands of the eternal fire without hesitation or doubt. The final stage of the Guardian's transformation revealed the ultimate truth behind the sacred vows, the enduring legacy of the eternal fire and the moral collapse that accompanied its preservation. After decades of rituals, purification, submission, and indoctrination, the Guardians emerged as beings whose identities were inseparable from their sacred duty. They were the living embodiment of the flame, their thoughts, actions, and even emotions channeled entirely into the protection and perpetuation of the fire. Yet with this unity came a shadow, the erosion of individuality, the suppression of empathy, and the subtle corrosion of morality. The very rites that created their extraordinary devotion also carved a path toward an existence where obedience eclipsed personal judgment, leaving only the flame as the guiding principle. Historical accounts suggest that the most senior guardians, those who had survived every trial and mastered every vow, often displayed a combination of reverence and subtle detachment, their decisions reflecting a balance between ritual fidelity and the pragmatic demands of survival. Their actions were precise, calculated, and infused with a sense of inevitability, demonstrating how deeply the eternal fire had embedded itself into every facet of their lives. They could navigate impossible challenges, enforce the most arcane rules, and maintain unwavering loyalty, all while carrying the weight of centuries of ritualized discipline. The Order's power was not in numbers or weaponry. It was in the transformation of human minds into instruments of unyielding devotion. and in the perpetuation of secrecy and control across generations. Yet for all the discipline and purpose, the record is clear that the flame consumed more than it illuminated. Guardians bore silent scars, memories of what had been lost, the fragments of humanity they had sacrificed to the fire. They were witnesses to suffering and endurance beyond ordinary comprehension, their own existence a testament to the power and the danger of absolute obedience. As we look upon these ancient practices, it becomes clear that the eternal fire was not just a physical force, but a psychological one, capable of shaping, controlling, and redefining the very essence of those who swore to protect it. The stories of these guardians serve as both a warning and a revelation. Devotion without question, while extraordinary, carries a cost that few can truly measure or endure. If you have followed the journey of these guardians from their first forbidden vows to their ultimate transformation, take a moment now to reflect on the scale of what they endured. Leave a comment saying, "I stayed with the flame," to show that you witnessed their story through to the end. If this exploration of devotion, sacrifice, and hidden power has intrigued you, give this video a like and make sure you're subscribed, because there are countless more chapters of human history that have been hidden for centuries, waiting to reveal the truths we often overlook. And while you consider their legacy, there is another story just beside this one that complements everything you've discovered here. Click over and continue with us, exploring the shadows where history and devotion intertwine in ways that will challenge everything you thought you knew about faith, power, and the human spirit.